Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Christiana from Balanced Bodies Wellness Clinic,
And I'm Emily from Rebel Shift Childhood Coaching and Consulting.
and we're here to offer this free talk, Revolutionize Your Parenting.
Yes, together we're going to help you discover how the past gets stuck in the present.
Yes, but first, let's just call out to the people who should listen in. Basically, parents, teachers, caretakers of children who are struggling to keep it together or who want to reclaim more peace in their lives. So, Emily's a conscious parent coach and inner child journey practitioner, a progressive educator, and I am a craniosacral therapist and a healer of the body through the somatic therapy arts. Together, we make a dynamic duo that has probably not been combined that much before. So, we are both experts on child development, and between the two of us, we have a lot of incredible information to start a revolution.
Yeah, no joke. We are on a mission to overthrow the system and create change in our world. We know the struggle is real. And for a lot of kids and families out there, we really want people to know they're not alone in this. So please, if you need some empowerment, reclaim your peace, as Christiana said, then I invite you to keep listening.
And we have a lot of material to cover in a short frame of time. We're going to skip over our bios. You can check them out on our website. I'll throw the links up here on the bottom of the screen. And if our message today resonates with you, then please think about joining our class that we have coming up in October. It's a 5-week dive into how you can help yourselves and your kids live healthy, happy lives. We're going to cover all the nitty-gritty on the latest science and therapy that's cutting edge. So why are we calling it a revolution? Well, first, we all know our present state of affairs on this planet is not sustainable. We as humanity are struggling. And Emily and I believe, along with a number of our colleagues in this field, that the systems we have in place need an upgrade. And if we want to make change for today and our future, we need to start with our children and how we grow them up. So let's start talking about this revolution, Emily. I want to know, what is conscious parenting? What does it actually mean? And how is it going to lead to connection to our kids?
But really, it's about learning how to be aware of ourselves and our kids. Awareness is a really big part of it. Learning about uncovering our history and the imprint that our history plays on our present relationships. Most of us didn't have our needs met as children. I'm just going to jump right in there with you. The world at large hasn't understood the science of the developing brain in the early years of life, and how the environment, emotional and physical, interacts with the developing brain. So we know more about that science, which is called epigenetics. So there's no more nature versus nurture. Instead, it's how our environment works in tandem with our genes and how stress affects the whole system.
Well, this is such a big comment, so I want to call pause on it. Environment and your DNA. Like, this
Yes.
discovery has truly revolutionized our outlook on life because it puts the spotlight on how we raise our kids, not what DNA they're born with, but what environment that we provide, not only in our house, but in our body, the environment that's in our body as a caretaker.
Yeah, that's right. So you we know that the earliest years of life literally set the stage for how we behave and think as adults. So there's a blueprint time in the early years. Because the brain is rapidly developing yet inefficient until around the age of 7. And so during those early years, 95% of the brain is developing, literally laying neural pathways and creating the foundation for later learning. So the way we view the world and understand the world, whether it's safe or unsafe, develops really early. And our brains continue to develop until age 25. We now know
That's
that.
crazy.
So which that means we're kids really until we're 25, although we'll talk about this more in the class because I think we're kind of always kids. And if we experience any kind of trauma or toxic stress during those early years, our ability to learn and grow is affected. Just kind of an intense statement. Trauma and toxic stress literally keeps us stuck in childhood. So we may look like adults, but really many of us are just big wounded kids walking around in adult bodies.
So there's the title of our class, which is How the Past Gets Us Stuck in the Present Time. And so what is it, Emily? What do kids need in order to develop in healthy ways? And how are we missing the mark?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're biologically designed to be connected to. That's actually one of my favorite things to say to people. It's so juicy.
Well, and it's my favorite word. That's why, I mean, if you watched any of our promo material, our bios, that was what I am fighting for my kids. That's why I got on this path, was connection. And this is why I want to hear more. Tell me, because when my daughter was born, I didn't understand anything about her needs, and she couldn't talk to me. So I was always trying to interpret when she cried as a little infant, like, oh, is she tired? Is she hungry? Does she have a dirty diaper? Like, what else? And like, when you do all those things and she's still crying, like, I don't understand, like, why is it such a big guessing game? And how can we learn the language of the body and ourselves to interpret what our kids are trying to tell us?
Yeah, it's so exciting. So, simply, I'll say, beyond food and clothing and shelter, children have emotional needs. Yeah. Just like humans have emotional needs. So connectedness, attention, safety, security, support, autonomy, freedom, expression, boundaries, love, mastery, competence, to be seen and heard, right? We all can understand the language that I'm saying, but the focus really hasn't been on nurturing those needs so much as, like I said, clothing, shelter, changing the dirty diapers, getting
because
sleep.
I mean, you just said being seen and heard, and we know this famous, like the Ferber method or cry it out method, where it's like, don't spoil your child.
Yes.
If you
so
really
damaging.
Yes, like if you do that, they think you're going to damage your child psychologically, but in the end, we're damaging them because we're not attuning to the fact that they have needs that can't be met by themselves.
That's exactly right, because kids don't look inside for support. They don't have that ability to do that. They search outside as to ease their internal conflicts, because that's how we're wired. They're very needy. They're very dependent. That's true. It can be frustrating, but it's important for people to know that that's how mammal babies behave. And we're basically babies for those first 7 years. So,
7 years.
Yes. And so
not through 1 year, not 2 or 3.
No, it's really those 7. And we continually need support. I mean, in my mid-40s, I still reach out for support when I'm struggling with something. Right. It's a natural thing to do. And I really want to normalize that and make that safe for people to know and to move around inside of that. We are meant to be connected to. We are literally biologically designed. Negative behavior is an external attempt to meet an internal need, and identifying those internal unique needs and feelings is the path forward.
I love how you said normalize, because my 12-year-old daughter, sometimes she has to regress and be in my arms like a 5-year-old or a 3-year-old. And that need in that moment is actually, it's repairing things that have happened, when she was that age. And if she needs that in that time, I'm not going to judge her and be like, grow up and act your age. Like that is her brain growing. That's her brain growing. So I just love that you said that, normalizing these behaviors, this looking inside of ourselves and figuring out what our need is. This is a skill that really, you just said, takes at least 25 years to master.
I'm still growing these skills, honestly, and I've been teaching this stuff a long time.
Right? I mean, it blows my mind. Like, it's not something we're born with. And the science world has now named it regulation. Like, it's actually a thing that happens in our nervous system that's coupled with our environment and our awareness of our environment. So our bodies are aware of our environment, whether we realize it or not. Like they're doing that all day long and they're interpreting the environment. Now we have to build the conscious brain to become aware of how our bodies are reading the environment and how our experiences in the past are putting on a lens, right, for us to interpret the environment. Because sometimes our past kind of skews what we see in the present. And
Absolutely.
that's the whole key to regulation, right, Emily?
Yeah, yes. I love what you just said. It's so juicy. And how the body and the brain work together, but it's a little disorganized. We it needs a little bit of help. So yeah, we lose our ability to regulate when we're triggered. That's true for adults too. So even we may have a bunch of tools, if we get triggers and we're in toxic stress or trauma, we are going to have tunnel vision. And it's really what happens for young children too. They don't have the skills yet. They need a lot of buffers of support. But when the brain gets pulled back into that low brain, fight, flight, freeze, we can't do much. We're in protective survival mode. And we respond to triggers, right, based on our past experiences, our DNA, and our personalities. I think I like to highlight that because sometimes people think that their behavior is their personality, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it's past experiences. I like to suss that out a little bit too.
That makes sense because that's, I mean, what you're trying to say is that the default mode that our body switches into when we're triggered right now, and we're talking to adults, right, on the call, when
Right.
adults are triggered, their pathway of reaction is something that they formulated years ago.
Long time ago.
Yeah.
That's
And
right.
so if you're going to make change and you're not really happy with how you react, this is the skill that we're trying to bring to you and teach you about. And even more depth. We're going to go over some skills today in the call, but even more depth in the class. Like, you want to make change, you want to be able to regulate how you react. Tell us, Emily, like, what is it?
Yeah.
What is this all about? This response automatically that we're doing?
Yes. So we respond automatically when we're triggered and we struggle to access our thinking mind. So to assess the situation, we're looking for safety or danger. It's an automatic response in our brains. We scan and seek evidence to confirm if we're safe or not. As a survival mechanism, we disconnect from ourselves because so many of us have unprocessed trauma in our bodies. Our brains might overreact, like you were describing a minute ago, and automatically respond to the sensations or the emotions that come up in our bodies. And then if we don't have the mechanisms of support, we're going to grow what we call maladaptive strategies to protect ourselves, right? We see this with adults all the time in our avoidant, stress avoidant culture that we live in. So, maladaptive strategies, it's an impulsive term, or it's a fancy term for impulsive or irrational behavior. It's the overreacting or the underreacting that we tend to do, we rely on as default. So these strategies grew in us over time and in environments that were not nurturing for us and not supportive because we didn't have this information previously. So this really isn't about shaming anybody's parents or making people feel bad. It's another thing I really like to be cautious about. We are humans, we're flawed. Like, this is not about perfection, but let's just tell the truth a little bit here. We didn't have those mechanisms of support, and we survived. We have survived so much, but we're not thriving until we really make sense of all this stuff. So when our bodies were overwhelmed and desperate for relief, our brains flood with cortisol and adrenaline, and therefore without access to that thinking part of our brain or the ability to regulate to get there, we overreact. So it's a lot about dysregulation and stress on the body. And that's the space that I like to spend time in, right there. I like to dig in there where our wounded parts live. When we can connect to our wounded parts, we can tell those stories from the past and identify the emotions and map those to our feelings. we can gather the information we need to grow new skills, so that we can function in a different way in moments of distress.
That makes a lot of sense. So don't stop, keep going. You're doing good. All this stuff makes a lot of sense.
So we can learn to pause. It's difficult. When we're angry or overwhelmed, we can learn how to take care of ourselves in those moments, so that we don't have to react to it in the moment. So just because you're angry doesn't mean you have to react out of that. I think that there's some confusion for folks inside of that, because we tend to dismiss anger. You're not supposed to be angry, right? That's shameful. It's like, well, actually feeling angry is just a normal, healthy emotion. Honestly, there's some information in there, but the way you act is where there's issues in the world, right?
Yeah.
So beyond that logic, the missing tools, how to regulate, how to process, how to organize our experiences, how to map our needs and feelings. This is a learning process, and it can be difficult and takes loads of practice, and it's available. We've got some fantastic tools to share with people inside of us.
Well, and this is when you start going on about cortisol and anger and repression of emotions, and we talked about lower brain, higher brain. I just need to catch my breath for a moment. So I see, you know what I'm doing.
Yeah, it must feel pretty.
Here comes the craniosacral lady, but I'm going to have everyone just breathe on the call. Like, let's just take a moment. I'm going to put my hand on my heart. And I'm going to just hear my heartbeat while I breathe. The Heart Math Institute has brought us so much science on how people's nervous systems can just naturally downregulate or downshift, like you're driving a car, go into a lower gear, slow-paced way of being, just by listening to your heartbeat and breathing. Okay, that helped me a lot. I don't know about you.
Yeah, it does.
An opportunity
it gets
to breathe
me every time. Every time. It's pretty powerful. And I just want to highlight our other conversations we've had too, because if you don't have experience with these regulation tools like pausing and breathing, like we just did for a moment, and you try it, the first few times, you may not feel much, right? And I realized this in a call that we had, where I've been doing this for at least a good decade in terms of regulation and my attempt to regulate, whereas I did a bunch of yoga and mindfulness stuff prior to that. But in terms of this work, it's been about a decade. And so I have like my vision gets a little blurry. Like I feel I have a big reaction in my body, but you pointed out that it really is about practice, so the more we practice these things, the more results we're going to see from them. So I just want people to know, don't give up. If you're new to this and you're attempting to take some breaths and you're like, I still feel really mad. That's okay.
Okay, because not only that, it's proving what we're saying in our, when you're saying that we have a default mode, that when we're triggered, our body reacts in a way that it's learned over time. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're trying to build grooves into the nervous system, new facilitated pathways. That's another science word that we'll throw out there. But reality is, like you and I are talking about practicing down regulation. So that's exactly right. Like I can go from 1,000 miles per hour and boom, I just close my eyes, and all of these things like the oxytocin release, the endorphins, they kick in because my body's used to being able or resilient enough to drop into a different state of being in my nervous system. Like,
and I love that too, like interrupting, right? We're interrupting the pattern. I use that terminology a lot when I'm working with sensory sensitive kids too. So, building a new groove, shifting it up, interrupting a pattern that's not working for us, I think is a really great mindset to have on.
And this is, you mentioned tools for parenting, and in our classes coming up in October, that's what we're going to be covering in greater depth, is the tools that you can do to maintain regulation in your body. And it is a practice of the body. That's why I love that you and I have paired together, because, you know, we have the cognitive science, we have the talk therapy, we've got all of that, but we have like real experience of being with kids and being with ourselves. So Emily, you just made this profound statement that deserves more contemplation. And again, I'm going to call a pause around. I want to highlight. When we were kids, you said we were most likely not taught to look inside ourselves for support. And in fact, we're not designed to handle this coping skill at a young age. It's just not there. That's why I love being around my grandparents or my parents when they say like, this, your kid needs to act more grown up. And I'm like, wow, that's exactly this is what we're talking about. Kids search outside of their bodies to ease the internal conflicts. They are hitchhikers on the caretaker's nervous system. So as adults, we're supposed to have the brain power to assess our internal awareness, and we should be able to feel into our bodies and sense what state of being we're in. And this is the sign. There are signposts that you can train and learn. It's just like going to driving school, right? And learning the red light, yellow light, green light, go. But the signposts of our nervous system, this is the stuff that we're not teaching kids in school right now. And if they could learn this along with adults, these are the things that will make society change. This is the secret sauce to the revolution that we're trying to stir up. And I love it because whether we operate at a sped up pace, if we're anxious, overly stressed, or the opposite, you mentioned understimulated and we don't have appropriate reactions, there's like underreactivity, we're disconnected. Either way, there goes that connection word. We're disconnected. And I bet there's people on this call who live a pretty sped up life and they know they can relate to hectic routines. So when I breathe and just down regulate my nervous system, and I get a reboot to my system. And this is interesting because the majority of people in our country, in North America, according to the Department of Health Services or Human Services, I always get that messed up, but Human Services says that 46% of our population in the last 30 days has taken some sort of prescription drug. And that includes children, because children who are on some sort of depressant or stimulant of the nervous system. Because this is what it's all about, folks on the call, like our nervous system. That's what's interpreting the environment that we're around. So if you're around a caretaker who's stressed out or in a revved up, overwhelmed state of being, the people that are naturally in that environment are going to adapt to that feeling in their body, and their body is going to become revved up and not be able to slow down. So this is what we're trying to tell you, is that you can consciously change your environment internally, therefore to change the external environment that your kids are marinating in. So this is another, let's go right into the other deeper, now that we've said all this stuff, I want to try an exercise that's a somatic exercise. It's called 3 points of contact. I learned it from one of my mentors, Kate White, in the pre and perinatal psychology field. And it's all about deepening into relationship between two people, because the two people are the field, right? And with parent, caretaker, and a child, there's a space between them. So what I'm going to do is have us just notice our bodies right now and where we feel discomfort in our bodies. Let's use that as a signpost. Okay. And then I'm going to name 3 points that my body is making contact with. And then I'm going to ask you, Emily, to do the same. And we're going to do it 3 times. And then we're going to notice how we feel in our bodies. And whoever's listening into this call or in the future listening in, you can do the same thing. just do a quick body scan, notice what you're feeling in your body. And then after we do the exercise, notice how that area of discomfort may have shifted. That's the whole point of this. So I already know that I'm feeling a little tightness in my low mid back. And I know it's probably just from, getting geared up and talking on a recording with you, Emily, and talking about this information we're so passionate about. What are you noticing?
I'm noticing actually quite a bit of comfort or warmth in my low back today. Yeah, my low back and my butt, my thighs, my seat feels pretty comfortable, actually, supported and warm.
Okay. And is there anywhere that you're feeling discomfort?
Got scanning. Yeah, I guess I am carrying some tension in my shoulders.
Okay.
Actually, a little bit.
Well, I'll go ahead and get started and notice 3 places that my body is coming in contact with something. And I'm noticing my hands on my thighs. And I'm noticing my back pressing into my chair. And I'm noticing my feet making contact with the floor. What are you noticing, Emily?
Yeah, so I'm noticing my upper back against the chair, in my seat, in my thighs, in my feet on the floor.
And I'm noticing now just my eyelids resting on my eyeballs. And I'm noticing my right cheek. I can just feel a little, maybe the muscle just feels a little bit more taut, and I can feel that. And I notice now I'm just noticing my butt in the chair. What are you noticing?
I got my hands in my lap. I'm just noticing where my back of my hands are touching my thighs. And when I'm not talking, noticing my tongue on my mouth. And just how my neck is holding my head.
Well, and just now I'm noticing my forehead and just the space between my eyebrows. I'm noticing my shoulders, the weight of my shoulders. So I can just kind of feel them moving downwards. And I'm noticing my mouth, just as a little, just relaxing it a little bit. What do you notice?
Yeah, the weight of my hands, I'm aware of the weight of my hands and my hands. Yeah, saying I feel pretty aware of. And if I visually kind of scan my body and my mind, I just feel kind of acutely aware of all the places that are touching the surface, or like in a capsule. I feel like I'm just aware of the whole scan.
Well, and this is, now that we've done 3 revolutions, I'll just throw that word out there. I just want you to notice your shoulders where we started, where you maybe felt a little tightness up there. What are you noticing there and overall in your body now versus when we started?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm aware of the tightness, but I guess there's a little bit more fluidity for me inside of it. And yeah, I'm really aware of the comfort. Good chair today.
What's funny
kind
too,
of grounded inside of it.
that grounding, there's something too about our space. Like it feels a little, like for me, like more viscous, like a heavy. Like there's
Yeah.
warm, like oozy.
Yeah. Warm.
Yeah,
Comfort.
it's so funny because this is, this is interesting that we're on a Zoom call and we're not in the same room, but we're sharing the space between each other and we're demonstrating to others on the call that we have a relational field between us. And this is why children feel into our environments. Like this is their job of their
Yeah.
nervous system, like mirror neurons. They
Yeah.
mirror what they see is how their body grows, right? I mean, this is where
Yes.
attachment theory comes from because your attachment styles are basically how your caretaker attunes to you, how your caretaker connects to you or
Yeah.
doesn't. And this is interesting because even though, my discomfort's shifted a little bit, it's softer, my back's not so tense, and I feel again a little bit more of a regulated pace that I'm flowing in, and I feel more connected in my body because I just noticed my body. I took the time for it. And it's so funny because in this exercise, you just made more connection between your mind and your body. So we went to brain gym there. We lifted a little weights for our mind body connection. And you and I both draw our knowledge, a lot of our knowledge from Robin Grill, who wrote the book Inner Child Journeys.
Right.
And we have taken his work and adapted it with our therapy models, which is really exciting. So I'm just curious, like, I want to know more now that we've taken a break, how we can heal the wounded parts of ourselves, our childhood traumas that will continue to drive our lives. And I know in our class, we're going to go over how our brain is a use it or lose it dependent organ. And I just wanted to pick up right there, Emily, and have you take the ball and run with what is behavior? Like, can you tell us what behavior is and how it's linked to trauma?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So until we take the steps to consciously heal the wounded parts of ourselves, our childhood traumas will continue to drive our lives. It's really unconscious. Honestly, this is about peeling the layers. Round and round, over and over again. The brain is, like you said, it's a use it or lose it dependent organ, and practice really does make perfect. So tuning into what we're practicing, I think, becomes really important. We get to decide what we're practicing, and practicing deepens our familiarity with our body and with our behavior. So behavior is communication of an unmet need, an unprocessed feeling, or an untold story. Bad behaviors is actually a stress response. That's like one of the biggest things about this work, is that we now know that those behaviors that, all the behaviors that people complain about,
Yeah.
children or even with adults, right?
Yeah.
Disrespectful, explosive, rude, annoying, selfish, all of those things. We do the best we can, really, truly, with the tools that we have. And stress is deceiving. It really, really, really is. And those maladaptive strategies that I mentioned earlier. Yeah. So yes, it's about stress. It's about the nervous system and then the body's external attempt to navigate what's going on internally. And young children, they don't know what's going on, right? And some of those big feelings can be unbearable for them because they've never experienced it before, and they live in the moment, and it just feels awful inside their body, Yeah. So we do the best we can. It's really true. So let's learn some new skills. Conscious parenting and teaching is really not about a set of rules, right? It's kind of this expansive idea. It's a set of beliefs about what children need to learn and grow and thrive. And then it's also based on that latest neuroscience too. So it's the psychological best practices mixed with neuroscience mixed with our desire to raise thriving children, right? There's that belief. So being conscious means a parent is emotionally aware of their individual needs as well as their child's individual needs, and that we can self-regulate in order to process and build strong attachment. That's based on connection and safety and love. The conscious model shows us how to nurture empathy and attunement. That's my favorite word. Connection is your favorite word. Attunement is mine. Responsibility, regulation. We know kids need to co-regulate for a long time before they can learn how to independently regulate. So there's another, that self-soothing idea is a made-up idea, and the scientific term is regulation, and we know that babies, children need lots of co-regulation for a long time before they can do it for themselves or facilitate in their community, right? To be able to support a friend who's struggling. But then again, it's not weird or unhealthy for even adult bodies to want to seek out connection and co-regulation when they're feeling upset. I certainly do that. I like to get hugged when I'm upset. Yeah. It really helps me regulate. So yeah, the conscious model shows us how to nurture all of those things so that we're helping raise these kids, nurturing these kids to be all the adult things we want them to be: responsible, loving, problem solvers, independent, intrinsically motivated, with a sense of purpose in their lives. Yeah. Basically.
That's what you just so sending them off to their room or sitting in a corner until they can calm themselves down, that's not a tactic that actually works. Really.
It really isn't. I mean,
not a healthy way for the nervous system.
It doesn't. And it maps on the brain in surprising ways. We end up teaching self-centeredness when we isolate and push kids away. They don't learn how to be part of a community when we're telling them they're bad and they need to go. They're going to absorb, like what you were saying before. Like, I really believe that as a core belief, but now there's science that backs it up. But kids are tapped into their parents. They're channeling their parents. Yeah. There's energy exchange, and they're going to interpret the message over what you say more often than this
is why this is a revolution. Because when I start thinking about this, and my back gets tight, because I realize that everywhere you go, everywhere you turn, these concepts of traditional parenting are so entrenched in our society, and we're not even aware of them. Like, we just accept it. Like, this is the way it is because this is the way we were brought up. And now we know that there's a science out there that's proving that this is why the world is messed up. Yeah. This is why we have prisons that are overflowing and people who have tons of stress, and we rely on medication to like have quick fix. And I'm not going to go further because this is not how I was raised. And a great example in my mother's household where children were objects of child labor. Like, she loved us. She didn't know how to really be emotional with us. Like, she didn't hug. We didn't hug. We did that at my dad's house. We hugged at my dad's house. But my mom, we were in charge of chores and making sure her house was landscaped well and it was clean. And on Saturday mornings, we weren't allowed to rest and just chill in her presence. Like, there was no cuddle time or warm fuzzies. It was, she would be in our room at 7 a.m. vacuuming around our head. And she would have already, prepared herself to go to Lowe's and like get like, things done around the house, because she just never could sit. And if we were sitting, and if I was just trying to do something to like relax, and because part of our needs as human beings is to just be sometimes, just to be, like, to sit and enjoy, like looking at the sky or being out in nature.
Oh, absolutely. But it's shamed as being lazy, right? It's
that's exactly what a lot of my childhood was, being shamed for being lazy. And I was so driven as a kid. Like, I was nothing near lazy, according to my mom, I was, but I just think that's interesting because we're talking about old paradigm and we want to bring a revolution, right? We want to overhaul the old paradigm
Yeah.
and tell us more about that. Like, what is the new paradigm that we're trying to achieve?
Yeah. Yeah. So much like you just described, and it's, when you describe that stuff, I'm kind of in that with you, right? And there's this transferring of stress. Your mother wasn't evil, but she was coming into a situation thinking, I have to get these things done and I have to raise these children this way, or I'm not doing it well. I mean, she had a set point. She had something that was driving her. It was stress. There was stress in there,
A
but
lot of
there's
stress.
there's a dialogue, and then she's transferring that to you, right? You're your own person, your own personality, and so you're going to move within that the way that you move within that, right? Some of
Well,
us
what
are,
you just had, that's where I have to interject real quick.
yeah,
That's the story.
right,
You're starting to narrate a story. You're starting to interpret there's something a little bit more there. And you're right. My mom grew up in a very poor situation in the South, and her father died when she was 10. And her mother had to take on all the work, and she was a school teacher, didn't make very much money, had 3 kids, and they grew up with this imprint of scarcity.
oh yeah,
Like everybody had to contribute. There was no, time for relaxation. Like they had a farm to run, they had
yeah.
clothes to make and food.
Get to
Yeah.
work, right? And so the story is important, and
Yeah.
you're not alone in that story. It's actually quite common too, for a
Yeah.
variety of reasons. Immigrants have that story too. I mean, it's fascinating when we start telling our stories because there's so much connectivity inside of it. And stress is the driver. Real fear is driving that behavior. Um, so the old paradigm, and this is depending on how old you are, right? But if you're 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, you're going to relate to some of this. It's been going on since the Depression,
Yeah.
if not a little bit before that. So judgment, criticism, control, compliance through manipulation, power over. Those were the main parenting tools. That's how we deal with bad behavior or with children who, childism is really this, this way of viewing children like they're less than. And then there's all that
Yeah.
stress of having to teach them how to be little adults instead of listening to their feelings, mapping their emotions, validating their experiences, all which are necessary experiences for them to develop emotional literacy and self-regulation so they can learn how to get a job, they can learn how to be an adult, they can learn how to function and navigate the world well, which I do believe is what every parent's wishes for their children. That these are unconscious patterns that are literally in our DNA. And so it's not about like, oh, I'm choosing to be an asshole parent and I'm choosing to be a nice parent. Like that is not what this conversation is about, right? We do the best we can with the tools that we have until we have another tool presented to us or until we awaken to some of this information. And we need a map. We need a map to do it. We can't just think of it one day. If that were true, I would have figured this out when I was a teenager. I've been
Oh yeah, and I wouldn't have gone through 10 years of like therapy.
I mean, I've been in therapy since I was a child. So yeah, we sacrifice our relationships when we use control and compliance. That's the other thing too, is that there's so many relationships that we maintain kind of sort of with our families and with people in our lives that are flimsy and not truly connected. I think a lot of us don't know how to really connect. So conscious parenting and teaching is about building really strong, connected, juicy relationships, healthy relationships that have patience and tolerance of big emotions. We again normalizing some of these things that are true for all of us that we just don't talk about. let's talk about the stuff people don't talk about. It's like so overdue.
That's a revolution in itself.
Revolution. Like let's get curious about the muck, you know.
Yeah.
Let's get connected and support and problem solving and really understand that relationships are about us. They are about us.
Yes.
You know, especially as the adult. So science teaches us that fear activates the nervous system. So the limbic system is the midbrain, and that's the part of our brain that's going to get flooded with hormones when we're triggered. And then there's a little moment before we get pulled down into our low brain, and that's when we're in the fight, flight, freeze.
So I'm hearing all these neuroscience words.
Yeah.
I get, but what really is at the crux is this, is that children's nervous systems and brains are fundamentally different than an adult brain.
Yes.
So if you don't get all the neuroscience words on the call for anyone who's listening, the idea that is that traditional parenting, meaning all the ways that everyone on this call has been raised with, unless you're extraordinarily lucky, and you probably wouldn't be listening to this call, that those parenting techniques, whether you realize it or not, are based around fear.
Yes.
And scarcity. There's a big one. Because I mean, the American dream is all about scarcity, baby, even though it's about abundance, right? And so most of us aren't even aware of this. Fear-based parenting tactics. That's what it is. That's what traditional parenting is. That's what our systems are based off of. It is the survival of the fittest.
That's right. I love the acronym false evidence appearing real too for fear.
Say that again. False evidence
appearing real, which I really have mapped to that illusion, that triggered response.
Yeah.
That we have. There it is, you know, and so I want that to be the new trigger for folks, right? To get us on board.
Wow. So we can even put words to describe these parenting behaviors that we'll go over in depth in the upcoming class. And I love it because it's like, here's the big ones: revenge, gaslighting, intimidation, conditional love, manipulation, shaming, domination, and judgment. Now, I know people are listening on this call like, what? Is that really what I'm doing?
I know, it feels awful. It feels
Doesn't
awful.
That feel awful?
I don't want to shame. I'm not into shaming people into compliance in terms of this stuff. And you know what's true for me is that as a rookie, when I was first doing this, I came on so strong with such passion. I didn't realize that I was kind of doing if you do this, then you're harming your child.
You were doing what you learned how to do.
I did. But it was like, at some point I was like, oh, dang. Like, we can't shame people into compliance. Shame is not a sustainable tool. It's what we're working against. So, you know, and if I'm really telling the truth, which that's my goal these days.
Truth shall set you free.
Is that, you know, this is not about perfection. This is not about not messing up or not having a bad day or not having huge disruptive things happen in our lives. They do. We cannot outrun stress. It's gonna be here. So let's stop trying to avoid it. No more sweeping under the rug. No more, do this so that we can not have a bad day. Like, no, we're gonna have a bad day. How about we have that conversation? We're gonna have a bad day. Things are gonna get hard. And then what are we gonna do? What are we gonna actually do to navigate it so that our relationships stay intact, so that we don't fall off a cliff? Right. You know, what can we do? So
maladaptive strategies. I know that's what you were going to talk about.
Yeah, I mean,
and how to change them.
So maladaptive neuroception, all that weird stuff that we do, all the strategies we have to avoid the real stuff, works in tandem with our experiences and develops early in life. You know, one of my maladaptive strategies that I really realized relatively recently was that I was a performer. I learned how to perform. I learned how to mask. I got a lot of attention for it. You know, I took theater classes and I was a child model and did all those, you know, so it was part of my environment and I got attention inside of it. But I also learned how to work it and not be my real self, you know, so kind of masking who I really was. And because it was so intertwined in how I was raised and maybe some of my talent or strengths, it seemed like I was choosing it, right? Or it was good. But what I found was that it was a maladaptive strategy to cope with being dysregulated. It wasn't safe to be like, I'm really having a hard time right now. I have no idea what's going on. It wasn't safe to say that. Instead, it was like, oh, put on a show. Act like you got this. Fake it till you make it. Right? So
you make it.
Fake it till you make it. So understanding that even though we know more about neuroscience, it's relatively new, and we want to help people, you know, with the fine tune it, right? So instead of revenge, we want to replace it. Here's part of the shift, right? The paradigm shift. Replace revenge with curiosity, right? Or manipulation, instead of manipulating. And so manipulating, I hate that word. I know people feel really judged by that word. So a common manipulation is, if you finish your dinner, you can have ice cream. Right? So you're trying to get somebody to do something for you, right? Instead of an authentic interaction. It doesn't mean we don't have boundaries with kids, by the way. We can talk about that more. But when you say, if you do this, then I'll give you this, that is a form of manipulation. So instead of manipulation, we want to turn towards regulation. You know, if things are, because people tend to use that when things are stressful, right? If you clean your room, then I'll take you out for ice cream. If you do this thing for me, then I'll do this thing for you. Instead of diving in and saying, it seems like you're stressed out about this thing. Let's get some regulation going on here, or some connection to make sense of this. So instead of judgment, we want to turn towards respect, you know? So judgment sounds a variety of ways for parents with kids, you know, like, why did you do that? Right? A lot of it's your tone of voice. Why are you acting like that? Right? Instead of respect is going to sound a little different. It's going to be like, wow, I'm not sure what's going on, but I'd really like to help you make sense of this problem.
Yeah.
Right? So,
well, but that's it right there. Again, something's going on in that caretaker, that parent's nervous system. They're triggered. There's a story there. There it is, the behavior, that tone, like, what are you doing? Like that knee-jerk reaction, like that, you know, that anger that flared up. You can feel that, right? There's something there in the story that's a wounded place in that parent, and they're just acting, and there it is. There's that edge that we can create when we uncover the story, right, and give narration to it. Now we become fully aware. That's where the practice is. That's where it's like, oh, and to give you a real life example, like I used to do that all the time. My daughter would drop something or spill something, and I would be like, in my body, like my body would be screaming inside, and I would have a knee-jerk reaction. And my story, I told you, you can't have disorder in my mom's place. That was an area of judgment, an area of failure, an area. I mean, there's so many other things that would shame that would come.
It was also about survival. Listening to you talk about it, it's survival. Your mother's perspective was survival. If we don't do it this way, we're gonna die. Like it was that intense, right?
That
like there
intense.
was a feeling of you just can't. You cannot slip up. You cannot
but here
relax.
I am. I'm in that same story because
Yep.
it just got passed on to me. And I didn't even
Yep.
know what that story was about. I didn't live in that time.
Right.
But now all of a sudden, when I have a kid and the same thing happens that I did when I was a kid, I'm reacting in the same way that my mother did. And I'm like, whoa, what? Hold up, hold the buzz like this. And this is why it's so cool, because all this information that you're giving us is how we can build upon conscious parenting. And the definition now I want to say is that it's a collection of experiences that bring opportunities for bonding with your kid, for connecting
Over and over
with
and
your
again.
kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, as you grow your children up, you're actually growing yourself up and
Yes.
realizing like, oh, here's where we heal the world. We heal, you always hear this and you never get it. It's like you start with yourself. If you want to change the world, you start with yourself. Well, guess
Yeah.
what, folks? You can't change the world if your nervous system is still in havoc, like everybody else's nervous system. So it's kind of funny, this whole way that we interact with each other. The reality is children are a reflection of their parents' nervous systems.
That's right.
And the nervous system of their grandparents and their great grandparents. And this is what epigenetics is all about, right? Like how the DNA gets flagged and tagged when I love telling this story. You are an egg in your mother's ovary, a fully developed egg with all your DNA.
Yep.
When your mother was 5 months gestation in her mother's belly.
Yeah.
So my daughter was actually in my mother.
Yeah.
You know,
It's crazy.
when my mother was, did I get it right? It's like, yeah, basically my daughter's grandmother.
Yeah.
She was already all there.
Yeah.
My daughter was like present for all of that before I was even born.
Yeah.
And her DNA was getting tagged based on my grandmother or my mother's environment.
Yeah.
So I know the last part of our call is about the ABCs, that little acronym about the ABCs for conscious parenting.
Yeah.
And this is like going to tee off like the framework of where we're going to go deep dive in our class in October.
Right. So just really briefly, A, B, and C. So the A stands for attachment. And really, we've talked about that too. And it's not just something you do to tiny babies. Attachment is a lifestyle. So we're going to continually be building an attached bond. And the benefits for children that have been attached to by their caregivers, that's paramount in healthy relationships. We need really good attachment to feel safe in relationships. And that's what children need initially so that they can build healthy relationships in the future. And without attachment, there can be no regulation. And without regulation, there can be no learning. So attachment, really, really important. And there's more to say about that. I do feel like as a longtime teacher, I've been a classroom teacher for a long, long time. And the relationships I've had with all the hundreds, maybe even thousands at this point, 20 plus years of teaching, there's attachment there too. I've attached to children in my classroom over the years, and to understand how profound that is, it doesn't mean that we're attached forever, but for a time, I'm your guy. For a time, I'm your safe person. And it's just a wonderful thing to be aware of when we're raising young children. And reality is a lot of us we're stuck with attachment related issues. And we see that in our primary partnerships too. It comes up a lot in adulthood for people. So those attachment wounds, again, that goes right into what we've been talking about. We're going to talk more about that because it really can be a journey of self-discovery, this work. That's what it's about. It's the me search, right? We research ourselves, like you were saying too.
Well, this concept of attachment is really fundamental in understanding how somatic-based therapies, which just means body-based therapies, can help a person heal from old wounds. And we don't mean by somatic-based therapies, we don't mean just massage therapy. We mean like what we're doing on the call, like how you get the mind and the body connected. And those wounds become patterns imprinted in our bodies. And to make new patterns, we must first become aware of the pattern that was created in the past. And this is the keynote of our topic today, Emily, and what we're going to explore so deeply in our class that we're offering soon is we are all walking around with these patterns that came from our past, and they repeat like reflexes without us even consciously acting them out. And to move forward, we have to become aware of old patterns governing our lives. And this is when the type of therapy I work with, and I know you have your type of therapy that you're going to talk about, but I use this as it's a new paradigm. Like we've got a 3-prong approach to somatic-based therapies. It's not just about massage therapy, right? It's about somatic experiencing, meaning what we did today, naming stuff that you're feeling in your body, right? And then feeling those sensations when they go, like what's happening in and around you, right? When you're telling the story, because you can tell a story about your past and all of a sudden it can come into your body, that story. The sensations that were happening. And this mindfulness skill entails connecting your mind to what's happening in your body. Building that bridge, again, comes with the practice of presence, being present, like right here and now. And what does it mean to be present? It means having the regulation skills within your nervous system to slow down to a state of being when you can process all the stimuli that's coming in to your brain, because that's what stress is. Stress is the opposite. It's when, well, there's different types of stress, but bad stress or toxic stress is when there's overwhelm to the system. And that trauma is anything that the nervous system can't handle in that moment in time. So now we've made your first big connection, Emily. Secure, nurturing attachment is rooted in presence. So I know you have the ABCs lined up. What's the B in this new approach?
So the B is brain science. So a lot of what we've been talking about, again, the neuroscience. Yeah. So those first 7 years of life, all the things that we know, which is really what we're going to get juicy on in our 5-week course we have coming up, is really helping people understand the exact needs that are developing in those first 7 years at specific times, like at birth, at 18 months, at 4 years old. Like it's so exciting. So that how the brain develops and matures, what is needed, how we can meet those needs, how we can repair brain science, and the co-regulation conversation. So yeah, we've covered a lot of that today. B is for brain science.
B is for brain science. Okay, I definitely get this. And how we're going to map out the developmental stages of human development, right?
Yes.
And that's where our colleague Robin Grill comes in, because he made this psycho-emotional, that's cool, psycho-emotional developmental needs chart for parents to reference. We're going to go over these in big details and teach you how to build a map in this class. Like it's really quite fascinating how easy it is once you get the hang of this practice.
Yep.
And that's the second prong of my therapy model, is about brain science. It's really what we call prenatal and perinatal psychology. We use the knowledge of how people come into form.
Yeah.
Right? How they come into form and what's going on developmentally in order to identify the need that they need from their caretaker. And this brings us back to the last key ingredient, which I know is a C.
You got it. And that sounds for conscious communication. I was gonna say, what's your favorite word? Connectedness.
Connection. Yeah, I got you, Stu.
Connection, connected language, or conscious communication. There's lots of good C words in there. So learning how to set boundaries and do all the parenting things we need to do without blame, shame, guilt, judgment, harshness is vital to this paradigm shift. But it's not about being passive. There's a lot of misunderstanding about that. People are like, oh, you just shouldn't say mean and terrible things to your kids, which is true, but it's not that you don't say no, or that you don't, have reactions, but repair is also part of that compassionate communication. So different than shame that comes out as sorry, like we have sorry culture. It's another conversation for another time, but forcing young children to say sorry before they have the cognition to even have empathy or relatedness. Right. So then we have this whole generations of people that say sorry and they don't mean it at all. And so I'm working within that frame too, which is how do we grow accountability, right? How do we nurture personal responsibility in relationships, and how do we repair difficult things within relationships too? And conscious communication. We are, we're not using conditional love, isolation, manipulation, rewards or punishments even are out the door. Instead, we are intentionally connecting, including setting limits, being empathetic, tuning, being gentle, but not always. I'm not a gentle person all the time. Like I'm pretty jazzy, so we're going to work with who you are too, but it's really not about being passive. It's not about coddling. It's not about passivity. It's not about only being calm all the time or anything like that. So our kids definitely need confidence and boundaries, attention and connection, and intimacy, emotional intimacy. And intimacy isn't just, what you do with your spouse in the bedroom. it's part of healthy relationships with people. So more than the words that we speak, it's those messages that we're sending, which is also part of that C for communication. And then there's a 3-pronged approach too. You talked about yours. I'll just say what mine is.
I love it. Yeah.
Under the neurodevelopmental approach too, and that is how we look at needs when we're dealing with difficult behavior, and that's support, stress, and skills. So support says what support is needed in this situation, right? What does the kid need? What support do they need? Or maybe it's you that needs some support. And stress, the part of stress is where's the stress coming from, right? This child has their unique perception on the world, or their experience or lack of experience, and they're experiencing some level of stress. Where is it coming from? Let's identify that. And skills, is this kid lacking skills, and is my expectation that they should have these skills, like you mentioned earlier, developmentally appropriate, right? We put so much pressure on young children to behave like little adults. Recently, somebody asked me and said, well, where's that list? And I thought, maybe I should be the one to write that list of all the things that are developmentally inappropriate for young children. It's likely all the things you think they should be doing aren't developmentally appropriate. Because we've been trying to raise little adults for a long time. We really want to let kids be needy, but there's a difference between being dependent and doing the coddling thing. The coddling thing is more for the parent. I see.
It's an attachment style.
Yeah. The parent is gaining something by doing that. So it's really, when we do our own internal work, then we have a clearer view on being able to assess other people's needs.
Wow, I love neuro approach because this is the last part of your conscious communication, the C, this communication with others. And you mentioned how you have a 3-prong approach. The 3rd prong approach to my therapy model is craniosacral therapy, which is kind of like a buzzword right now. And people are like, what is that? And yes, it's an energetic healing modality. It's not voodoo. It's an intimate connection with somebody's nervous system and kind of like feeling into that space. And I hate people like get blown away. They're like, how do you do what you do? And I'm like, actually all of us have that ability. We've totally turned off those senses to what I'm trained to do with craniosacral therapy. I hate to tell you, but your kids are doing it all the time. Because the brainwave states that they're in like theta alpha brainwaves. They're like in deep meditation all the time.
That's why I love them so much. I love little guys so much for that.
This is that's why kids respond so well to craniosacral therapy. because we're just like, oh, I'm like I'm right in their brain house, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's one of the things that I love about it is because in all of this, everybody has a unique story, and sometimes it's not as easy as knowing skills in our brain and practicing in our body. Sometimes we really need more support in order to release trauma.
That's right.
And that's where craniosacral therapy comes in, and some of these like somatic experiencing, like Peter Levine's model. But this is the stuff that's kind of changing the world, the element that's being, introduced, that's entirely different than allopathic medicine. It's about intimacy with your nervous system and how it can be changed through the support of a conscious observer, being the practitioner. And I love this. Emily, you and I work in tandem with others, or with each other, sorry. You and I work together to help families. And you just told us a little bit about your neuro approach. And I want to just sum up today's talk, hearing a little bit more of your thoughts on the class coming up. But again, I'm going to put the details on the screen right here on below, that it's in October. It's 5 modules once a week. I think it's 2 hours a class. Yep. It's all recorded. So if you can't make it to class, like, it's available on demand. It has an awesome little digital workbook that we're going to have everything housed on a server, so you can access that, and it has great exercises, YouTube videos. There's a lot of content, and we're offering the class for $250 for the whole 5 packages. And it gives you access to Emily and I. And if you need support for your families, that's another avenue that we can approach you about or talk to you with. But if you do sign up for the early bird, once you see this talk and you use the link that's here that we've provided, at the end of this call, you'll get the price for $195 for the 5.
Early bird pricing. Yes, I love these topics. I love this work. I love Christianna. I'm so thrilled to be offering this groundbreaking tools in a tangible way, robust learning for folks. Our goal is to make this really digestible for you. And I just can't wait to jump in. Can't wait to get started.
I can't wait either, because if you're really feeling stuck right now and you want more agency over how you parent your children, and you want maybe even community, just somebody to, listen to some of the things you're going through and throw out an idea like what's going on with your kids' behavior, this is a great place to come. This class will be a nice haven, and we're going to be offering more in the future. So stay tuned.
Yes.
Thank you for joining the call today.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.